Have you ever been judged so harshly by your appearance that people refuse to believe who you actually were? Have you ever experienced that crushing moment when you realize the people around you value superficial things more than the actual human being standing in front of them? Well, let me tell you about the day I walked into my own office building wearing torn, dirty clothes and watched as my own employees called security on me, refusing to believe I was their CEO. This wasn't some social experiment or undercover boss episode. This was real life, and it revealed truths about my company, about society, and about myself that I never wanted to face. My name is Michael Harrison, and I'm the CEO of Harrison Tech Solutions, a software development company with over 300 employees spread across 4 office buildings in downtown Seattle. For 15 years, I built this company from the ground up, starting in my garage with nothing but a laptop, a dream, and an unhealthy amount of coffee. I poured my heart, my savings, my relationships, and countless sleepless nights into making this company successful. We went from 3 employees to hundreds, from barely making payroll to generating millions in annual revenue. I thought I knew everything about my company. I thought I understood the culture we had built, the values we promoted, the kind of environment we had created. But that morning, that terrible, eye-opening morning, I discovered I had been living in a comfortable illusion, surrounded by yes men and carefully curated interactions that never showed me the ugly truth lurking beneath the surface of our corporate culture. The day started like any other Tuesday. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning, went through my usual routine of meditation, a quick workout, and a protein shake that tasted like cardboard, but supposedly contained all the nutrients my body needed. I remember feeling particularly good that morning, energized and ready to tackle the day ahead. We had a major presentation scheduled for 10 o'clock with potential investors from Singapore, people who could inject the capital we needed to expand into the Asian market. This was huge for us, possibly the biggest deal in our company's history. I had spent weeks preparing for this meeting, rehearsing every slide, anticipating every possible question, ensuring every detail was perfect. My assistant, Jennifer, had confirmed everything the day before. The conference room was booked. The presentation was loaded on the system, the catering was ordered, and all the key department heads were briefed and ready. Everything was supposed to go smoothly. But life has this cruel way of reminding us that we're never really in control, no matter how much we plan, no matter how prepared we think we are. I left my house at 7:15, giving myself plenty of time to get to the office, review my notes one final time, and ensure everything was absolutely perfect. I was driving my Tesla, the same car I had bought 3 years ago when we hit our first major revenue milestone. It wasn't the fanciest car in the world, but it meant something to me, a symbol of how far we had come. The morning traffic was lighter than usual, and I was making good time, actually enjoying the drive and mentally running through my opening remarks for the presentation. That's when I saw her, an elderly woman, probably in her 70s, standing on the sidewalk next to a car with its hood up, smoke billowing out from the engine. She looked absolutely terrified, frantically waving at passing cars, but everyone just drove by. Everyone was too busy, too focused on getting to their own destinations, too wrapped up in their own lives to stop and help another human being in distress. I felt something twist in my chest, a combination of empathy and guilt. How many times had I driven past someone who needed help because I was too busy, too important, too focused on my own agenda? How many times had I told myself that someone else would stop, that it wasn't my responsibility, that I had more important things to do? I pulled over. I told myself I would just make sure she was okay, maybe call roadside assistance for her, and then continue to the office. It would only take 5 minutes, 10 at most. I could spare that time, couldn't I? When I approached her, I could see the relief flooding her face, tears actually welling up in her eyes. Her name was Margaret, and she was on her way to the hospital to visit her husband who had suffered a heart attack the night before. Her car had just suddenly started overheating and died, and her cell phone was dead because she had forgotten to charge it in all the chaos and worry about her husband. She was absolutely beside herself, not knowing what to do, terrified that she wouldn't make it to the hospital in time. I couldn't just call her a tow truck and leave her there. I couldn't abandon this frightened, desperate woman who just wanted to be with her sick husband. So I made a decision. I told her I would drive her to the hospital myself. It was only about 15 minutes out of my way, and I could still make it to the office with time to spare. I called Jennifer and told her I might be a few minutes late, but that everything was under control. The drive to the hospital should have been straightforward, but that's when the universe decided to really test me. We were about halfway there when a truck in front of us hit a pothole, and its poorly secured load shifted. Before I could react, bags of construction debris, dirt, cement powder, and what looked like old insulation came crashing down, covering my car in a cloud of filth. I swerved to avoid the worst of it, but not before the windshield was completely obscured and the entire front of my car was covered in this disgusting mixture of dust, mud, and debris. The worst part was that my window was partially down because the air conditioning had been acting up, and a significant amount of this filthy mess came directly into the car, covering me, covering the seats, covering everything. I was instantly transformed from a well-dressed CEO in a tailored suit to someone who looked like they had been digging ditches for days. My clothes were ruined, covered in streaks of mud, cement dust, and unidentifiable grime. My face was smudged with dirt, my hair was full of debris, and I smelled like a construction site. Margaret was apologizing profusely, as if this was somehow her fault, but I told her not to worry about it. These were just clothes, just material things. Her husband was in the hospital, and that was infinitely more important than my appearance or my expensive suit. I managed to get the windshield clear enough to drive safely, and we continued to the hospital. By the time we arrived, I looked absolutely terrible, but Margaret was so grateful, so relieved to finally be there that she actually hugged me despite how filthy I was. She thanked me at least a dozen times, tears streaming down her face, telling me that I was an angel, that God had sent me to help her. It's strange how moments like that can put everything into perspective. Here I was, worried about a business deal, about making money, about expansion and growth, and this woman was just desperate to be with the person she loved, to hold his hand, and let him know he wasn't alone. As I drove away from the hospital, I checked the time. It was 8:45. The presentation was at 10. If I went home to change, I would never make it back in time. If I went directly to the office looking like this, I would make it with about 30 minutes to spare, enough time to at least wash my face and maybe find something in my office to make myself slightly more presentable. I had spare shirts there, I was pretty sure. Maybe not pants, but the investors would be sitting at a conference table, so perhaps if I stood behind the podium the entire time, it wouldn't be too noticeable. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just call and reschedule? Why didn't I explain the situation and push the meeting back a few hours? The truth is, these investors were only in Seattle for one day. They had meetings scheduled all afternoon and were flying out that evening. It was now or never, and I had worked too hard, prepared too much, and invested too much of my company's future in this opportunity to let it slip away because of some bad luck and dirty clothes. So I made the decision to go straight to the office. I would figure it out. I would make it work. I always did, didn't I? I was the CEO, the founder, the person who had overcome countless obstacles to build this company. Surely I could handle one presentation while looking less than perfect. Besides, I told myself, this might even make me more relatable, more human. These investors would see that I was the kind of leader who could handle unexpected challenges, who didn't let setbacks derail important objectives, who kept pushing forward no matter what. Maybe this would actually work in my favor. That's what I told myself as I drove toward the office, trying to convince myself that everything would be okay, that this embarrassing situation might actually have a silver lining. I pulled into the parking garage at 9:15, giving myself 45 minutes before the meeting. As I got out of my car, I caught my reflection in the window and winced. I looked even worse than I thought. The cement dust had dried and caked onto my clothes, making them stiff and uncomfortable. My hair was sticking up at odd angles, matted with dirt and debris. My face had streaks of grime across it, and my hands were absolutely filthy. My shoes, expensive Italian leather loafers that I had bought specifically for important meetings like this, were scuffed and covered in mud. I looked like I had spent the night sleeping under a bridge, like I was homeless, like I was the kind of person that society had forgotten and ignored. But I was still me underneath all this dirt. I was still Michael Harrison, CEO of Harrison Tech Solutions. I still had the same brain, the same knowledge, the same capability and authority. The only thing that had changed was my external appearance. Surely that wouldn't matter. Surely my own employees would recognize me, would understand the situation, would help me get cleaned up quickly so we could proceed with this crucial meeting. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and headed toward the elevator that would take me up to the main office floor. The parking garage was nearly empty at this hour, with most employees not arriving until closer to 9:30 or 10. I rode the elevator up alone, using the reflective walls to try to make myself slightly more presentable, but it was hopeless. Every attempt to brush dirt off my clothes just seemed to smear it around or make it worse. I looked awful, and there was no way around it. When the elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, where our main offices were located, I stepped out into the familiar hallway with its polished floors, modern art on the walls, and the subtle scent of the expensive air fresheners that our facilities manager insisted on using. Everything looked exactly as it always did, clean and professional and corporate. And then I saw the first person, Rebecca from accounting, walking toward me with a coffee cup in her hand and her phone in the other, probably checking her morning emails. I started to say good morning, to explain what had happened, but before I could get a word out, her eyes went wide with alarm. She didn't recognize me. Her gaze swept over my filthy appearance, and I saw her expression transform from surprise to fear to disgust in the span of about 2 seconds. She quickly stepped to the side, pressing herself against the wall as if I might be dangerous or contagious, and hurried past me without saying a word, though I heard her mutter something under her breath that sounded like, "How did he get in here?" That stung more than I expected it to. Rebecca and I had been in meetings together dozens of times. I had personally approved her promotion last year. We had chatted about her daughter's college applications and her concerns about student loans. But she looked at me in my current state and saw a threat, saw something to be avoided and feared. She didn't see a person who might need help. She didn't see her CEO who had obviously encountered some kind of problem. She just saw dirty clothes and made an immediate judgment about my character, my worth, my right to even be in this building. I told myself it was understandable, that she had been caught off guard, that in a different context, she would have recognized me. I continued down the hallway toward my office, which was in the executive suite at the end of the building, but I didn't make it very far. As I rounded the corner into the main reception area, I found myself face to face with 3 more employees: Thomas from marketing, Jennifer's assistant Alyssa, and someone from IT whose name I couldn't quite remember. They all stopped dead in their tracks, staring at me with expressions that ranged from confusion to outright alarm. I raised my hand in a friendly wave, about to explain the situation, but before I could speak, Thomas stepped forward with his phone already in his hand. His voice was sharp and authoritative, nothing like the friendly, slightly nervous tone he usually used when speaking to me in meetings. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stop right there," Thomas said, positioning himself between me and the hallway that led deeper into the office. "How did you get into this building? Did you follow someone through the parking garage entrance?" I stared at him for a moment, genuinely confused. Did he really not recognize me? Was my appearance so drastically different that he couldn't see past the dirt and grime to the person underneath? I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him who I was, but he cut me off before I could get a word out. "I need you to stay exactly where you are while I call security. If you leave now without causing any trouble, we won't press charges for trespassing." Charges? Trespassing? In my own building? I felt a surge of disbelief mixed with growing anger. This was getting ridiculous. I pulled myself up to my full height, trying to project the authority and confidence I usually carried, though I'm sure the effect was somewhat diminished by the fact that I looked like I had crawled out of a dumpster. "Thomas, it's me. It's Michael. I had an incident this morning and I need to get to my office to clean up before the 10 o'clock meeting with the Singapore investors. If you could just..." But he wasn't listening. His expression hadn't changed at all. If anything, he looked more concerned, maybe even a bit angry that I had the audacity to claim to be the CEO. "Sir, I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but Mr. Harrison would never show up to the office looking like this. He would never let himself be seen in this condition. I'm calling security right now, and I strongly suggest you turn around and leave before they get here." The other 2 employees had backed away, and I could see Alyssa filming me with her phone, probably to have evidence in case something happened or to post on social media later, about the crazy homeless man who tried to infiltrate their office. My heart was pounding now, a mixture of humiliation, frustration, and a growing sense of disbelief at what was happening. These were my employees. I had hired some of them personally. I had approved their salaries, had attended their birthday celebrations in the break room, had sent congratulatory messages when they achieved milestones. and they were looking at me like I was a criminal, like I was something dangerous that needed to be removed from their pristine, perfect office environment. I tried again, fighting to keep my voice calm and level. Thomas, I understand this looks bad. I understand I don't look like myself right now, but I am Michael Harrison. I am the CEO of this company. I need to get to my office, and I need to do it quickly because we have a very important meeting in less than an hour. Have you ever been in a situation where no one believes you, no matter what you say? Comment below if you've experienced anything similar. Thomas had his phone to his ear now, and I could hear him speaking urgently to someone, presumably the security team stationed in the lobby on the first floor. Yes, we have a situation on the third floor. There's a man who appears to be homeless or disturbed who somehow got into the building. He's claiming to be Mr. Harrison, but that's obviously impossible. He's filthy, his clothes are torn, and he looks like he's been living on the streets. Can you send someone up immediately? Yes, the main reception area on 3, thank you. He ended the call and looked back at me with that same mixture of suspicion and disdain. Security is on their way. I suggest you cooperate with them when they arrive. If you have any explanation for how you got into this building, you can give it to them. I felt something break inside me in that moment. Not anger exactly, though there was certainly anger there. It was more like a profound sadness, a deep disappointment in the realization of what this moment represented. These people didn't see me. They saw clothes. They saw dirt. They saw something that didn't fit their narrow definition of what a successful person, what a CEO, what someone worthy of respect should look like. They had made a judgment in seconds based purely on superficial appearances, and nothing I said could penetrate that judgment. I thought about just pulling out my wallet and showing them my ID, proving who I was right then and there, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was a desire to see just how far this would go, to understand exactly what kind of culture existed in my company when I wasn't around, when people thought they were dealing with someone beneath them rather than above them in the corporate hierarchy. So I stood there in the middle of my own office building, surrounded by my own employees who refused to believe I was who I said I was, and I waited for security to arrive. The silence was awkward and tense. Thomas kept his eyes on me like I might suddenly bolt or become violent. Alyssa was still filming, though she was trying to be subtle about it. The IT person had disappeared entirely, probably going to warn others about the crazy homeless man in the reception area. I could see other employees starting to gather in doorways and around corners, peeking out to see what was happening, drawn by the commotion and the whispered urgency of the situation. I recognized so many faces. Angela from Human Resources, who I had personally mentored when she first joined the company fresh out of graduate school. David from the legal department, who had helped us navigate several complex contract negotiations. Maria from customer service, who had been with the company for 8 years and had one of the highest satisfaction ratings in her department. They were all there, watching, whispering to each other, and not one of them recognized me. Not one of them stepped forward to say, "Wait, that actually does look like Mr. Harrison. Maybe we should listen to him." They all just accepted the narrative that Thomas had created, that I was some intruder who had somehow snuck into the building and was now causing trouble. The elevator dinged, and 2 security guards emerged. Both men I recognized from seeing them in the lobby every morning when I arrived. Carlos and Jeff, I think their names were. I had always made a point to say good morning to them, to remember their names, to treat them with the same respect I showed everyone else in the building. Carlos was the older of the 2, probably in his 50s, with a gray mustache and a no-nonsense demeanor. Jeff was younger, maybe late 20s, still relatively new to the job. They approached quickly, their hands resting on their belts near their radios, clearly ready for trouble. Thomas immediately launched into his explanation before I could say anything. This man somehow got into the building and is wandering around the office. He's claiming to be Mr. Harrison, but obviously that's ridiculous. I need you to escort him out of the building immediately and find out how he bypassed our security systems downstairs. Carlos looked me over from head to toe, his expression unreadable. Then his eyes met mine, and for just a moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, a slight uncertainty in his gaze, but it passed quickly, replaced by professional detachment. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us," Carlos said, his voice firm but not unkind. "We can sort this all out downstairs. If there's been some kind of misunderstanding, we'll figure it out. But right now, you need to leave this floor." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of exhaustion and frustration settling over me like a heavy blanket. "Carlos, Jeff, It's really me. I know I don't look like myself right now. I had an emergency this morning that resulted in me getting covered in construction debris. But I am Michael Harrison. I am the CEO of this company. I need to get to my office immediately because we have the Singapore investors arriving in about 40 minutes, and I need to clean up and prepare for that meeting. Carlos exchanged a glance with Jeff, and I could see them communicating silently, trying to decide how to handle this. Jeff looked skeptical, even a bit amused, like this was the most ridiculous thing he had heard all week. But Carlos still had that slight uncertainty in his eyes, a hesitation that suggested maybe, just maybe, there was something familiar about me that he couldn't quite dismiss. "Sir?" Carlos said slowly. "Mr. Harrison is always impeccably dressed. He drives a Tesla that's currently parked in his reserved spot in the parking garage. He wears expensive suits and has a very distinctive appearance. I see him every single morning, and I'm sorry, but you don't look anything like him." I felt a spark of hope. At least Carlos had hesitated, had considered the possibility, even if he was ultimately rejecting it. "My Tesla is in the parking garage," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and calm. "Spot number 1, right next to the elevator. The license plate reads HTS CEO. Check the security footage if you don't believe me." "You'll see me driving in about 20 minutes ago," Thomas interjected before Carlos could respond, his voice dripping with irritation. "Oh, so you just happened to steal Mr. Harrison's car too? Is that what you're claiming? This is getting absurd. Just remove him from the building so we can all get back to work." I could see the audience of employees growing larger, more people gathering to watch this spectacle unfold. It was humiliating beyond anything I had ever experienced. Here I was, a man who had built this company from nothing, who had created jobs for hundreds of people, who had worked 80-hour weeks for years to make this dream a reality, and I was being treated like a criminal, like someone who didn't belong, like someone whose words meant nothing simply because of how I looked. The injustice of it burned in my chest, but beneath that anger was something even more painful, a profound disappointment in humanity, in the people I had trusted and valued and worked alongside for years. Jeff stepped forward, clearly losing patience with the situation. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us now. You can either walk out voluntarily, or we can call the police and have you removed and charged with trespassing. Your choice." I could have continued to argue. I could have insisted more forcefully. But what would have been the point? They had already made up their minds. They had looked at me, seen someone who didn't fit their expectations, and decided I was lying. Words weren't going to change that. Evidence was what I needed. I reached slowly into my pocket, moving deliberately so they wouldn't think I was reaching for a weapon or trying to do something dangerous. "I'm going to take out my wallet," I said clearly, keeping my hands visible. "Inside it, you'll find my driver's license, my building access card, my corporate credit cards, and several other forms of identification that will prove I am exactly who I say I am." Carlos nodded, watching my movements carefully as I pulled out my wallet. It was a nice wallet, expensive leather that I had bought during a business trip to Italy 3 years ago. It was worn now, the leather soft and comfortable, molded to fit perfectly in my pocket. I flipped it open and pulled out my driver's license, holding it up so everyone could see. The photo showed me clean, professional, wearing a suit and tie, my hair neatly styled, looking exactly like the CEO they expected me to look like. But the name was clearly visible: Michael Jonathan Harrison. Date of birth, address, all the standard information. Carlos took the license from me, studying it carefully. His expression changed as he looked from the photo to my face and back again. I could see him trying to reconcile the two images, trying to see past the dirt and grime and disheveled appearance to the bone structure beneath, the shape of the face, the eyes that were the same, even if everything else looked different. The color drained from his face as realization dawned. "Oh God," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. "It actually is him." Jeff leaned over to look at the license, and his reaction was even more pronounced. His eyes went wide. His mouth dropped open, and he actually took a step backward as if he had been physically struck. "No way. That's impossible. Mr. Harrison would never." He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. I pulled out my building access card next, the one with my photo on it and CEO printed clearly beneath my name. Then my corporate American Express card, also with my name embossed on it. I laid them out one by one, a paper trail of evidence proving my identity beyond any possible doubt. The crowd of employees that had gathered to watch the spectacle was absolutely silent now. I could feel their eyes on me, sense their growing horror as they realized what had just happened, what they had just done. Thomas had gone pale, his confident, authoritative demeanor completely evaporated. His hands were shaking slightly, and he looked like he might be sick. Alyssa had stopped filming, her phone now hanging loosely at her side, her expression one of absolute mortification. I looked at each of them, letting the silence stretch out, letting them fully absorb the magnitude of their mistake. Then I spoke, my voice quiet but carrying clearly in the suddenly hushed space. I am Michael Harrison. I have been the CEO of this company for 15 years. I built this company from nothing. And this morning, when I tried to enter my own office after helping an elderly woman get to the hospital to see her dying husband, an act of basic human kindness that made me late and ruined my appearance, I was treated like a criminal. I was judged, dismissed, and threatened with arrest by my own employees simply because I didn't look the way you expected me to look. Thomas tried to speak, stammering out the beginning of what I assumed would be an apology, but I held up my hand to stop him. I wasn't done. Not one person asked if I needed help. Not one person considered that there might be a reasonable explanation for my appearance. You all looked at me, saw someone who was dirty and disheveled, and immediately decided I was worthless, that I was dangerous, that I didn't belong in your clean professional space. You made that judgment in seconds, based on nothing but superficial appearance. I could see tears forming in Alyssa's eyes. Angela from Human Resources had her hand over her mouth, looking absolutely horrified. David from Legal was shaking his head slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. I took my identification back from Carlos, who looked like he wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. Do you know what this tells me? I continued, my voice still quiet but filled with an intensity that made everyone lean in to hear. It tells me that we have a serious problem in this company. It tells me that despite all our diversity training, despite all our talk about values and respect and treating everyone with dignity, we have created a culture where people are judged instantly and harshly based on appearance, where someone who doesn't fit a certain image is immediately seen as less than, as other, as someone who doesn't deserve basic respect or the benefit of the doubt. I looked directly at Thomas. You assumed I was running a scam because you couldn't imagine your CEO ever looking less than perfect. What does that say about the pressure we've put on people to maintain certain appearances? What does that say about how we value image over substance? Then I looked at the crowd of employees watching from doorways and corners. And the rest of you, you didn't speak up when you saw someone being treated poorly. You didn't question whether this was right. You just went along with it, happy to have some drama to break up your morning, some story to tell later about the crazy homeless man who got into the office. How many of you would have walked right past me if you saw me on the street looking like this? How many of you would have assumed I was lazy, or on drugs, or somehow deserving of my situation without knowing anything about me or my story? The truth of that question hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. I could see people shifting awkwardly, unable to meet my eyes, confronted with their own prejudices and assumptions in a way that was impossible to ignore or rationalize away. I was exhausted, emotionally drained from this entire ordeal, and I still had that presentation to prepare for. But this moment felt important, felt like something that needed to be addressed right now while the shame and realization were fresh, before people had time to construct comfortable excuses and justifications for their behavior. I want everyone to think about what happened here this morning, I said, my voice finally softening slightly. Think about the judgments you made, the assumptions you drew, and ask yourself if that's the kind of person you want to be, if that's the kind of company you want to work for. Because I can tell you right now, it's not the kind of company I want to lead. I turned to Carlos and Jeff, who both looked like they wished the floor would open up and swallow them whole. You were doing your job. I understand that. But I need you to think about how quickly you dismissed what I was saying, how readily you accepted that someone couldn't possibly be who they claimed to be simply because they didn't look the part. That kind of thinking is dangerous, and it affects how you treat everyone, not just me. Carlos nodded, his voice rough with emotion when he spoke. Mr. Harrison, I am so deeply sorry. There's no excuse for what just happened. I should have looked more carefully, should have listened better. I cut him off gently. I appreciate that, Carlos, but I don't need your apology right now. What I need is for you to remember this feeling the next time you make a judgment about someone based on how they look. That's the real change that needs to happen here. I finally turned toward my office, ready to escape this nightmare and try to salvage what was left of my morning before the investors arrived. But before I could take more than a few steps, I heard a voice from the back of the crowd. "Mr. Harrison?" It was Angela from Human Resources. She pushed her way through the gathered employees, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and determination. "I know this isn't the time, and I know you're dealing with a lot right now, but I think there's something important you need to know." I stopped and turned to face her, too tired to even feel curious about what she might want to say. "What is it, Angela?" She took a deep breath, clearly struggling with whether to speak up or stay silent. Finally, the words came tumbling out in a rush. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened. Not exactly like this, obviously, but judgment based on appearance. 3 weeks ago, we had a candidate come in for an interview for a senior developer position. He was incredibly qualified on paper, and his initial phone screenings were excellent. But when he showed up for the in-person interview, several people made comments about his appearance. He was wearing clean clothes, professional clothes, but they were older, maybe a bit worn, and he was visibly nervous, sweating a lot. I overheard Thomas and several others making jokes about him in the break room afterward, saying things like, "Did you see that guy? No way we're hiring someone who can't even afford a decent suit, and he looked like he rode the bus here." He didn't get the job, even though his technical assessment scores were the highest we'd seen in months. The room had gone completely silent again. Thomas looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Angela continued, her voice shaking but determined. "And it's not just job candidates. I've heard comments about clients who don't drive luxury cars, about vendors who show up in work trucks instead of company cars, about delivery people and service workers. There's this pervasive attitude that has developed here, this sense that success and value are measured by visible markers of wealth and status. And I don't think most people even realize they're doing it. It's become so normalized that no one questions it anymore." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind to what was happening in my own company? But even as I asked myself that question, I knew the answer. I had been insulated, protected by my position and status, surrounded by people who treated me with respect and deference not because of who I was as a person, but because of my title and power. I had created a bubble around myself, where I only saw the carefully curated version of my company that people wanted me to see. "Thank you, Angela," I said quietly. "Thank you for having the courage to speak up. This conversation is not over. We're going to address this, all of it, but right now I need to prepare for a meeting that could determine the future of this company. I want you, Thomas, Alyssa, Carlos, and Jeff, to clear your schedules for this afternoon. We're going to have a very long and very honest conversation about company culture and what needs to change." I made my way to my office, finally, leaving behind a crowd of employees who were probably going to be processing what had just happened for days or weeks to come. My office was exactly as I had left it the day before, clean and organized and professional. I had a private bathroom attached, which was about to become very necessary. I looked at myself in the mirror for the first time since the incident, and I actually understood why no one had recognized me. I looked terrible. The cement dust and dirt had caked into every crease and fold of my clothing. My face was streaked with grime, my hair was a disaster, and my eyes looked tired and stressed. I could have been anyone. I could have been homeless, could have been struggling, could have been having the worst day of my life, and my employees' first instinct had been to call security and have me removed, rather than offer help or show compassion. I stripped off my ruined clothes, threw them in a corner to be dealt with later, and stepped into the shower. The hot water felt incredible, washing away the physical dirt and grime, but unable to touch the deeper stain of disappointment and disillusionment that had settled over me. As I stood there, watching the dirty water circle the drain, I thought about Margaret, the elderly woman I had helped that morning. She had seen me, really seen me, not as a CEO or a successful businessman or someone with status and power, but as another human being who had chosen to help her when she desperately needed it. She had valued that kindness more than any amount of wealth or prestige or professional success. I dried off and discovered mercifully that I did have spare clothes in my office, a full suit that I kept there for emergencies. Though I had never imagined an emergency quite like this one, I got dressed, fixed my hair, made myself look like the CEO everyone expected to see. But something had shifted inside me. I looked the part now, But I wasn't the same person who had left his house that morning full of confidence and excitement about a business deal. That person had been naive, blind to uncomfortable truths, living in a comfortable illusion. The person staring back at me from the mirror now had had his eyes opened in the most brutal and humiliating way possible. I had 30 minutes before the investors arrived. I could have spent that time reviewing my presentation, running through my talking points, ensuring every detail was perfect. Instead, I found myself sitting at my desk, thinking about that developer who didn't get hired because his suit was worn, thinking about all the times someone probably made a judgment about another person based on appearance, thinking about the culture I had unknowingly allowed to flourish in my own company. The Singapore investors arrived right on time. The presentation went perfectly. They loved our product, loved our growth projections, loved our vision for the Asian market. They committed to a $15 million investment on the spot, the largest injection of capital our company had ever received. It was everything I had been working toward, everything I had dreamed of. And I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt something. But it wasn't joy or excitement or satisfaction. It was a strange emptiness, a sense that I had been chasing the wrong things, measuring success by the wrong metrics, building something impressive on a foundation that was rotten at its core. What good was financial success if it came at the cost of basic human decency? What good was expansion and growth if the culture we were spreading was one that judged and dismissed people based on superficial appearances? After the investors left, after the congratulations from the executive team who had attended the presentation, after all the obligatory celebration and excitement had died down, I gathered the people I had asked to meet with me in my office. Angela, Thomas, Alyssa, Carlos, and Jeff sat in various chairs around my desk, all of them looking uncomfortable and uncertain, probably expecting to be fired or severely reprimanded. I started the conversation with a simple question. Why do you think what happened this morning was able to happen? Thomas was the first to speak, his voice quiet and filled with genuine remorse. Because we judged you based on appearance instead of listening to what you were saying. Because we made assumptions. Because I didn't want to believe that someone in your position could ever look like that, so I dismissed the possibility entirely. I nodded. That's part of it. But it goes deeper than that. Angela mentioned that this kind of judgment has become normalized here. Why do you think that is? Alyssa spoke up, her voice tentative. I think maybe because success is so visible here. Everyone knows who drives what car, who wears what brands, who lives in which neighborhood. It's become a way of measuring worth, and when someone doesn't fit that mold, they stand out in a negative way. And whose responsibility is that? I asked, looking at each of them in turn. Whose job is it to set the tone and establish the values of this company? The silence that followed was heavy with realization. Finally, Angela said what we were all thinking. Yours, Mr. Harrison. The culture starts at the top. She was right, of course. I had been so focused on financial success, on growth and expansion and hitting targets, that I had neglected the most important thing, the actual human beings who made up this company, and the environment in which they worked and interacted. I had assumed that because we had diversity programs and HR policies about respect and inclusion, that the culture would naturally be healthy and positive. But policies and programs don't create culture. People create culture through their daily choices and actions and the behaviors they model and accept. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice firm but not angry. Starting tomorrow, we're going to conduct a complete cultural audit of this company. Angela, I want you to work with an outside consultant to interview employees at every level, anonymously if they prefer, to understand what the actual working culture is like here. Not what we say it is or what we want it to be, but what people actually experience day to day. I turned to Thomas. You're going to lead a committee on unconscious bias and its impact on hiring and promotions. I want a full review of our hiring processes, who we've passed over and why, what criteria we're actually using versus what criteria we should be using, and I want specific recommendations on how to address the problems Angela identified. Alyssa looked surprised when I addressed her next. You filmed what happened this morning. I want you to create a training program using that footage, showing what happened and facilitating discussions about snap judgments and treating people with dignity, regardless of their appearance. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Carlos and Jeff shifted in their seats when I turned to them. For security, we need to revise your protocols. Yes, you need to keep the building secure, but there needs to be a better balance between security and treating people with respect. We need procedures that verify identity without assuming guilt, that ask questions without making accusations. I paused, looking at all of them. But more than any of this, we need to fundamentally shift how we think about success and value. We need to create an environment where someone's worth isn't measured by their clothes or their car, or any other visible marker of wealth, where we extend compassion and benefit of the doubt rather than judgment and dismissal, where we see people as human beings first, before we see anything else. The meeting went on for another 2 hours. We talked about specific incidents, patterns of behavior, ways that our company had drifted away from the values I thought we held. It was painful and uncomfortable, but it was also necessary. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something that actually mattered, something that would have a real impact on people's lives. Over the following weeks and months, things changed. Not overnight and not without resistance. Some people pushed back against the new initiatives, arguing that we were being too sensitive or too politically correct. A few people, including some in leadership positions, left the company when it became clear that the old way of doing things wasn't coming back. But slowly, gradually, the culture began to shift. We instituted blind resume screening for job candidates, removing names and other identifying information so that qualifications were evaluated without bias. We started a mentorship program that paired senior employees with junior ones regardless of department or seniority, creating connections across traditional hierarchies. We changed our interview process to include questions about values and character, not just technical skills and experience. We created spaces for difficult conversations about bias and privilege and the assumptions we all carry. And I changed too. I started spending more time on the office floors, talking with employees at all levels, not just in formal meetings but in casual conversations by the coffee machine or in the cafeteria. I made a point of noticing and valuing the work that often goes unrecognized, the support staff and maintenance workers, and all the people who keep a company running but rarely get acknowledged. I volunteered at a homeless shelter one weekend a month, putting faces and stories to the kind of person I might have been mistaken for on that terrible morning. The Singapore investment went through, and we did expand into the Asian market. The company continued to grow financially. But I measured success differently now. I measured it in the developer with the worn suit who we hired, and who became one of our most valuable team members. I measured it in the anonymous feedback from employees saying they felt more respected and valued. I measured it in the knowledge that if someone walked into our office tomorrow looking disheveled and in need of help, they would be treated with dignity and compassion, rather than suspicion and disdain. Did I become a perfect leader overnight? Absolutely not. Did the company culture transform into some idealized utopia? Of course not. We still had problems, still made mistakes, still had moments where we fell short of our values. But we were trying. We were aware. We were having conversations that needed to be had. And that morning, that awful, humiliating morning when I was judged and dismissed by my own employees, became not just a personal trauma, but a catalyst for real change. Looking back now, months later, I can see that moment as one of the most important in my professional life, not because of the Singapore deal or the financial success that followed, but because it stripped away my comfortable illusions and forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about the company I had built and the culture I had allowed to develop. So let me ask you something. When you see someone who doesn't fit your expectations, someone who's dressed differently or looks different or doesn't meet some invisible standard you carry in your head, what's your first reaction? Do you judge? Do you dismiss? Do you make assumptions about their character or their worth based on superficial appearances? Or do you pause, consider that you might not know their story, recognize that everyone you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about? Have you ever judged someone unfairly based on their appearance? Have you ever been on the receiving end of that kind of judgment? Tell me about it in the comments below. I want to hear your stories, your experiences, your perspectives on this issue that affects all of us in one way or another. This isn't just about what happened to me in my office. This is about the broader culture we create in our workplaces, in our communities, in our society. It's about whether we're going to be people who look beyond the surface, who extend compassion and dignity to everyone we encounter, or whether we're going to continue making snap judgments that dehumanize and diminish those who don't fit our narrow definitions of success and worth. Understanding this matters because it affects how we treat others every single day. It affects who gets hired, who gets promoted, who gets help when they need it, who gets dismissed and ignored. It affects the kind of world we're creating and whether that world is one where everyone is valued, or only those who can afford the right clothes and the right cars and all the other markers of status that we've somehow decided determine a person's worth. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own assumptions and behaviors, if it challenged you in any way, please leave a like on this video. Your support helps share this message with more people who need to hear it. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that challenge us to be better, to see more clearly, to treat each other with the dignity and respect every human being deserves, please subscribe to Through My Eyes. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. We're building a community here of people who aren't afraid to look at uncomfortable truths, who want to grow and learn and become better versions of themselves. That morning when I walked into my office in rags and was treated like a criminal, I learned more about leadership, about humanity, about what really matters than I had learned in 15 years of business success. I learned that who you are isn't determined by what you wear or what you drive or what title you hold. It's determined by how you treat others, especially those who can do nothing for you, especially those who society has decided are less valuable or less important. It's determined by whether you extend compassion or judgment, help or dismissal, dignity or disdain. That's the lesson I want to leave you with today. That's the message I hope you'll carry with you when you leave this video and go back to your life, back to your job, back to all the interactions and encounters that make up your days. See people, really see them. Look past the surface to the human being underneath. Extend benefit of the doubt instead of immediate judgment. Choose compassion over contempt, because you never know when you might be the one covered in dirt, desperate for help, hoping someone will see past your appearance to the person you really are. Thank you for watching, for listening, for being part of this conversation. Remember, we're all just trying to make our way in this world, and a little kindness, a little understanding, a little willingness to look beyond the surface can make all the difference. See you in the next video.